Inside Outside Innovation is the podcast that brings you the best and the brightest in the world of startups and innovation. I'm your host, Brian Ardinger, founder of InsideOutside.io, a provider of research, events, and consulting services that help innovators and entrepreneurs build better products, launch new ideas, and compete in a world of change and disruption. Each week, we'll give you a front row seat to the latest thinking, tools, tactics, and trends in collaborative innovation. Let's get started. Welcome to another episode of Inside Outside Innovation. I'm your host, Brian Ardinger, and as always, we have another amazing guest. I am looking forward to talking to John Buhl today. John is a senior consultant with the corporate entrepreneur community, former principal at Vanguard, and he's been in this space of corporate innovation for quite some time. Welcome to the show, John.
Brian, thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm super excited to have you on the show. We met a couple years ago at one of the Lean Startup conferences, and I think you were driving a lot of the Lean Enterprise work at Vanguard. So to start our conversation there, what got you involved in innovation?
It's a funny thing. So at Vanguard, I was there for 13 years. I did a number of roles at the company, corporate strategy and client service. Eventually, I was leading our mobile and web programs, so leading our digital program. And about that time, the book, The Lean Startup, came out. And I immediately fell in love. I used to joke, some people have a bowl of candy on their desk that people come in and say, yeah, I had stacks of Eric's book there. And I got no royalties from giving those out. But I used to give up these books. And I found it so refreshing and so logical to me. A former engineer, too, so I think it resonated with my engineering undergrad background, that let's test hypotheses before we fully commit to ideas and quickly test them. And sort of sparked an interest and restructured our team and really started trying to apply those principles at scale at Vanguard.
I like that. And at those early days, the great thing about the Lean Startup book is it kind of gave some common core terminology in that of ways of thinking about some of this kind of stuff that have been happening throughout life, so to speak, but kind of gave some crystallization around that. Also, it was kind of that 30,000 foot view of the space. Yeah. And as you've seen over the last 4, 5, 6 years, a lot of that has changed and become much more tactical, like how you actually do this stuff. So talk about the evolution you've seen from the early days of, hey, this is kind of an interesting concept, to what's changed and where we're sitting at now.
Yeah, great point. So when the book first came out, this is amazing. Let's try doing it. And we hit a lot of brick walls. Like it's hard to do this. We tried doing cross-functional teams and we had some success. We tried iterating and being more metric-oriented and hypothesis-oriented and had some success. But there was just friction around the organization. Like this is a new way of operating inside a classic project-based organization, like most companies. A typical project at Vanguard, and again, most companies, nothing unusual there. You would fight for funding in the annual process, and you'd get your money for this particular project, and you'd have certain deliverables. We will build X, Y, and Z. The crazy part is, who knows if X, Y, and Z will matter? But the whole system is geared to deliver those outputs. And how do you shift to becoming outcome-oriented and actually driving results? And that's what Lean Startup's about and the underlying ethos. And the system wasn't set up that way. And so, fast forward, my experience there is we tried it for a number of years and realized there's some fundamental changes need to happen to make this successful at Vanguard. So I came offline, joined our chief technology office that was running an enterprise-wide program that was doing a number of things, moving to the cloud, really embracing DevOps and really faster software development. And then the part I was driving was, we called it Lean Enterprise. How do you do Lean Startup at scale, enterprise-wide? Yeah. And we partnered with a firm called ThoughtWorks, their IT consulting firm, that really helped us think through what are the people and process and culture elements from the team level. You got to get working in the team room with stickies and how do you innovate, up through budgeting and technology infrastructure and culture. All those elements need to change to successfully innovate faster, learn faster, and operate startup speed. That was the big insight. It's hard to do it alone. You need the system to change to enable it in a big company.
I think a lot of it, just different insights that you see. I think a lot of companies just don't even realize when, quote unquote, investing in innovation, that what they're investing in, how the old systems can be detrimental to that. You mentioned the budgeting process where, you launch a new project and it goes along for 2-3 years because each time it gets to the budgeting cycle and it gets just added back into the mix. And at some point, you don't do that metered funding. You don't do that thing that you would do if you're a startup to have to go back to the investors and say, hey, we're making progress. We need further stuff. And so it's an interesting process just to see how corporations are attacking innovation and now looking at it in different ways throughout the process.
It is huge. And the studying of how to make that change happen and budgeting and culture and incentives and really sparked an interest in me. And I left Vanguard back in January to join this, as you described earlier, the corporate entrepreneur community. Let me describe that a bit, and then that might even broaden up our conversation a bit.
Yeah.
So the corporate entrepreneur community was formed by Eric Reis, so a lean startup in the startup way fame, and a guy named Steve Liguori. And Steve has done a former executive at many companies, most recently at GE, where he headed up global innovation. And Steve left a number of years ago and was doing consulting. And he and Eric worked together at GE and then crossed paths and compared notes and realized sort of three things that they realized. So Vanguard's not unique here, is that every company that they talk to has the same problems. No matter what the industry, no matter the vertical, it's all the same. It's always budgeting. It's all the same. And the second thing is it's not science yet. I think Eric's written books and Steve has, but it's not like it's fully figured out. No one's fully figured out how to transform companies at scale yet. And the third insight that sort of led to the community was there's a gap. There's great content like this podcast or books. There's great conferences and great consultants. But between content and conferences and consultants, there's another C. There's community. Mm-hmm. And that peer-to-peer learning might be the magic to really help, my former self at Vanguard or other listeners to really accelerate change. Learning from each other, what works in your context, what works in my context, both strategy and tactics. How do you actually move the ball forward? We believe peer-to-peer learning is critical. If there's any takeaway your listeners take from this, is that innovation is hard to do this. Why do it alone? Find either an informal or a formal peer group to supplement the conferences and the content and the consulting and coaching. Community is just invaluable to making us all successful.
I think that's important to talk about. That's also one of the reasons why you're seeing kind of the rise in startups too, is 20 years ago, if you're an entrepreneur or startup, that there weren't communities you could go to learn some of this stuff. Venture capital was very difficult to understand what that was all about. And now you've got startup weeks in major cities where entrepreneurs and corporate innovators and folks can get together and see and work and learn from each other. And that idea of community and peer-to-peer mentoring, I think it's vaulted both the startup scene as well as now you're seeing it more and more in the corporate innovation space. Because, similar to an entrepreneur, corporate innovator is oftentimes that lonely guy in the garage trying to figure it out himself as well.
Absolutely. In fact, part of the value of joining our community, it's a bit of group therapy, right?
Yeah.
How do you have a peer group that understands your challenges? It's invaluable. And even Silicon Valley, we say that is a community, right? It's companies and ecosystem there that self-reinforces itself. And so plugging into an ecosystem or community is valuable, even for corporate innovators, for sure.
So you had a chance to be both inside within a company and seen other companies and talk to folks that are trying to do this. What are some of the major obstacles that a new company trying to think and move and act more like a startup or apply some of these principles, where are they stubbing their toes first? And what are some of the things that you're seeing that they're facing?
I was thinking, what's the problem to solve? So what are some patterns of problems we see companies encounter as they're trying to innovate at scale? And one challenge, sort of a paradox, is you have to change everything, budgeting, and we talked about a bunch of things, while you disrupt nothing. So you still got to hit the quarterly numbers. You still got to ship out whatever you're shipping and serve your customers and clients. So you can't disrupt that, but you're also trying to disrupt everything. And so that paradox, we could drill on this later, like how to solve that paradox. But that's one thing. You just to acknowledge you're trying to do that when you're trying to innovate at scale. It's really critical.
It kind of begs the question, really, can this be done? Or is it literally searching for that unicorn type of company that can make this actually happen? Or is it's going to be more like an 80-20 rule that 80% of the companies are really not going to be able to figure this out and they'll go by the wayside, and the 20% that do will be the ones that are the giants of tomorrow?
I don't think it's a binary, you get it or you don't. I think everyone's on a journey and a continuum. Vanguard, we improved, and all of our members, the evidence I see is companies getting better over time. And it is hard. And, how do you get to Amazon, a peak company, right?
Right.
Rapidly innovating. Is everyone going to get to Amazon? No. You don't have to get there either, though. And so I'm optimistic that you can get there, but there's a lot of lessons to be learned along the way. And so if you can learn from others, learn from history, learn from your peers, I think it's critical to get there.
We talked about community as being one of the core components of it. And we talked about now that there's a framework around it. What are some of the changes you've seen or some of the new tool sets or other things that are helping folks kind of get this and being able to actually execute on it that was different than 5 years ago?
For me, one big insight was make it your own. So as we go into these companies, we work with companies, there's so many books, frameworks, design thinking, lean startup. You have to make it your own. And so that step of for your own company, your own language, you got to package it for what makes sense in the particular problem you and your company face.
Mm-hmm.
And that, I think, to me is new, right? It's not this book or that book or the newest fad. It's that in the context of all the other learning. What tool set are we going to bring to bear for our company to move forward? And that's kind of a liberating idea that you don't have to have one book. It's not lean startup for everything. It's a great book, but what else goes together? And so that is really important to me. And the other one I'd say is there's activities at the team level. So in the team room, you've got sticky notes maybe and your different colored flip chart, you're innovating and all good stuff. But what will really make you successful is the leadership level, one or two levels above that, and governance. Mm-hmm. And how are you getting senior leadership aligned? How are they shaping the overall change? And how bought in are they into the change? And I'd say another learning that I've had, or more deeper appreciation, is the need to have great governance structures, dashboards, things like that to manage this change, to make sure it moves forward. It can't be bottoms up. Maybe start there, but it's going to burn out. There has to be a top-down buy-in for this to take off.
Yeah, so let's break that apart a little bit. I do see a lot of corporations and folks that maybe the product team has been exposed to a startup or something, and they're learning agile and design thinking, and so they start doing some of that kind of stuff and saying, hey, this really works, and this is changing our Horizon 1 optimization of our existing stuff. And that, how does a small group within a company that's kind of innovating in their little world bring that forward to get that buy-in from senior management? Or is there a grassroots approach that you've seen that works better than others?
Well, yeah, I'll give some advice. We'll see if it works. One would be careful. Because if you push too far, it can be tricky, right? And you're pushing against so many ingrained patterns and cultural norms that from a career perspective, you got to be careful. So what I would do is try to align yourself to a leader or an area of the company that might be more open to these ideas, and allow them, she or he, to kind of give some shelter and to allow you to experiment on these topics. And then in exchange for that, so that the trade is, you've got to give them evidence that it works. Yeah. You've got to give them a sense for a little bit at a time, right? We're going to try this. We formed a hypothesis. We tested it. Good. We had this hypothesis. We tested it. It didn't work. Thank goodness we didn't, spend 2 years and $10 million in this bad idea. And slowly build that evidence and work with your sponsor to build the credibility that, yeah, there is a better way. And so you slowly, it's like nurturing a startup, quite frankly. Your startup is a new way of doing work. And startups don't go from zero to unicorn overnight. And so how do you grow incrementally that idea inside, building evidence, building fans, not going too fast, not going too slow. There's art there. That's a safe way of moving forward. And it's much more likely to work. And at some point, someone's going to say, well, either disaster happens, Amazon announces they're moving into your space, or whatever the change of strategy or whatever the catalyst might be. When that happens, you'll have this pile of evidence in place, like, hey, this works. We can scale it. We've gone from 1 team to 4 teams, and it seems to be they're getting results and very good use of resources. Actually, let's do more of this. Mm-hmm. Get yourself ready for that day.
Yeah. As this takes hold, it seems to be like the journey of the corporate innovator, director of innovation, et cetera, has been evolving as well. So again, the easier stuff as far as understanding there's a different methodology and kind of this rapid experimentation in that. And now it seems to be like the industry's moving towards the tactical stuff around governance and metrics. And it's like, okay, we've gotten this far. What's next? So I guess what are you seeing from either the corporate entrepreneur community or other places that what's that next thing, next obstacles, next hurdles that corporate innovators are going to face moving forward?
I don't know if there's a next new thing, but I will say our community is these corporate innovators, these corporate executives. We get together, share best practices, and it's Hewlett Packard, it's Procter & Gamble, it's Vanguard, it's Munich Reinsurance, DuPont, big companies. When we get together, we talk a lot about internal silos and how do we break down so we can work faster with legal and work faster with procurement. And at Vanguard, we call them speed bumps. There's still these speed bumps in the way to progress. And I think working on those takes time. And it's maybe not glamorous, but those are the things that generate more speed and more flow, more throughput in your innovation efforts, which is what it's about. It's learning quickly. The learning part, you might think, okay, do experiments and learn, but doing it quickly, that's the hard part.
Absolutely.
And it might become tactical, it might feel tactical, but I think it's fundamentally rewiring the organization.
Who do you see out there that's doing this well? You mentioned Amazon, and I don't know if they necessarily do lean startup and enterprise kind of stuff, but they clearly the actions they take have some of those core components. But who else out there do you think seems to be leading the way and evangelizing this methodology?
I think a lot of companies have a lot of bright spots. I hesitate to name any particular company, certainly any of our members. We love all our members.
Yeah.
And they all have their strengths and they all have the things they're challenged with. Again, I don't think it's a binary thing.
Right.
If I was seeking inspiration, say, I would keep scanning, the conferences, the books, the communities, and pick the lessons out that are relevant for you. I throw Amazon out. That's not firsthand knowledge. That's just me reading. Who knows what it's actually like inside? I'll say one thing. I'm a fan of Elon Musk and a lot of what he does. Yeah. And I gave a talk recently. We're talking about experimentation. And SpaceX, one of Elon Musk's company ventures, they're landing rockets now. So they're launching rockets into space and then recovering their booster. There's video online showing that they're celebrating all the crashes of their boosters, their experimentation to get to the point where, we can do this. And to me, that epitomizes an extreme case of test and learn. We're actually going to blow up rockets in the quest to make launching and landing rockets easy. It's like landing a plane, no big deal. Totally embracing experimentation mindset, and I love that. That's an extreme case of the right mindset.
I love it. And I love the fact that we could probably talk for hours. If our audience wants to find out a little bit more about yourself or the corporate entrepreneur community, what's the best way to do that?
Sure. Check Google searches, corporate entrepreneur community, or our website is corpentcom.com, corpentcom.com.
Excellent. John,
and I'm John Buhl. Look me up on LinkedIn.
Yeah, John, I appreciate you being on the show. I appreciate all the insights from Vanguard and the new stuff that you're doing moving forward, and hope to get you back on the show at some point with some of the new and exciting things that you're learning as well.
Fantastic, Brian. Thank you so much.
Thanks, John. That's it for another episode of Inside Outside Innovation. If you want to learn more about our team, our content, our services, check out insideoutside.io or follow us on Twitter at the IO Podcast or at Ardinger. Until next time, go out and innovate.